includes inclusionary zoning. This would be similar to the project that's before you, where you have market units being built, and in those, as part of that market unit project, some of the units are put aside for affordable housing. Then you have 100% affordable projects. That's where a private entity or even a municipality can sponsor a 100% project. You have some where you have veterans housing. I know in one municipality that I work in, they've done 100% for homeless veterans, so something like that would count. There's a market to affordable program that you can use. That's where you take market units and you use some of your money from your Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and you take that market unit and give a subsidy to the landlord, who can then bring the rent down lower to have it available as an affordable unit. That unit would then be deed restricted for a period of time and would count towards your number. The benefit of that type of program is that it saves you from having to build new units, and you can take units that are currently out there and just make them lower so that it can be affordable. We have CGP&H, who's working with the township right now to identify market units that exist in the township that could possibly fit that program. Group homes, that's usually for a group home where beds will count disability, people with disabilities. Accessory apartments could be a house that has an apartment over the garage that you make affordable. And then zoning mechanisms, which Mr. Snickers will get into. Overlay zoning and zoning, or requiring if someone builds a multi-family unit, they have to include affordable units as part of that. So our task has been to look at our number and see what are those mechanisms that are up there that we can use and to best fit a plan for the township. When looking at sites for potential, especially new housing, the housing has to meet what's called the ABOLs, because all that ends in a bowl. Available, meaning clear title, free of encumbrances. Suitable, adjacent to compatible land uses, that has access to appropriate streets, consistent with environmental policies. Developable, access to appropriate water and sewer infrastructure. Approvable, and it may be developed, although not currently zoned for low and moderate income housing. So priority is given to sites where infrastructure is currently or imminently available. Procedurally, what happens next? We have a deadline that is kind of hanging over the township of February to get a plan, at least a sketch of a plan together to present to the court and to enter into hopefully a settlement agreement with Fair Share Housing. We are finalizing very shortly the vacant land adjustment and RDP number. That number hopefully will be finalized within the next 2 weeks or so. And as I mentioned, it's ranging right now between $850 and $1,000. We're trying to bring it down as low as we can. We have to finalize the selection of the mechanisms for inclusion in the toolbox. So that means we have to look at the projects that are out there that are being proposed to the township to see which projects fit best for the township. As I mentioned, we have at least 10 projects that have been proposed to the township. So council will be tasked with looking at those projects and determining which projects fit best for the plan. And again, our goal and our mandate is to meet that affordable housing number. And ultimately enter into a settlement agreement with the Fair Share Housing Center. Now, what might happen along the way is that every project may not get in the plan, which is not unusual. As long as the township meets its obligation number, then that is what counts. There are other mechanisms for projects to come to fruition, but every project may or may not be able to be part of the plan. And again, that's a decision that council will be making. We will have a fairness hearing regarding the settlement agreement with Judge Neergaard, and at that hearing, the township will be required to present its plan to the judge, saying, Judge, this is our plan and how we plan, or how we will be meeting our obligation number. Ed Snickus, as the planner, will be justifying that plan. It will be tested. The developers who are part of the case will or may challenge some of what is in the plan. And that's the purpose of the hearing. The public is free to come to the hearing. The judge will listen. Fair Share Housing will make their presentation, and the court master will chime in also about the plan. And ultimately, the judge will determine whether or not the township has met its constitutional obligation. Assuming that happens at the fairness hearing, the judge will set a schedule for the township to actually prepare its plan, which is the more detailed document laying out timeframes for the projects, and also to adopt the plan, which will go to the planning board, and a spending plan. And the spending plan will be how the township anticipates spending funds from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. During this period also, the township will adopt any ordinances that will be required or needed to help effectuate some of these projects, because some projects currently are not zoned for housing, and ordinances will need to be adopted to provide for that housing. And once all of that is done, we go back to court, and for the court to give final approval and certify the township's plan and give the township immunity to cover it until 2025, and then you start all over again until the legislature does something different. And once the plan is certified, there will be mechanisms in place for follow-up by Fair Share Housing. Usually it's 2 years after the plan is approved, to make sure that the township is in fact doing what it's supposed to do. And I can tell you the developers will be watching to make sure that you are, because if you're not, they will easily go to the court and say they're not doing what they're supposed to do. So finally, failure to act. If the township decides to do nothing, and I put dollar signs there because that's the result. There will be numerous lawsuits, which can be very, very costly. And it will come from various ways. Fair Share Housing will seek to sue you. The developers will seek to sue you. And the court may hold you in contempt for not acting in good faith. A key example, or the poster child for a municipality who falls into that or fell into that, was South Brunswick. They are the only municipality in Middlesex that did not settle. In that case, Judge Wolfson was very aggressive with the municipalities, and he found that the township, in his view, was not acting in good faith and proceeding to adopt a timely plan, and was not acting in good faith. And as a result, I would say easily $1 million has been spent by the municipality fighting lawsuits with the developers. And as a result, most importantly, the township's plan will not be that selected by its elected officials, meaning the council or the planning board. The judge took away the power of the township council and took away the power of the planning board to decide what their plan will be, and gave it to a new court master, with the developers giving their input. So a plan is being developed in South Brunswick without the municipality's input. The problem or the concern that anyone should have about that is you lose control. The council has no control, planning board has no control, and the developers are in the driving seat. And that's the end result if the township fails to do anything or fails to come forward with a compliant plan. So we hope not to be in that situation, because if you are not the one in control, you don't control the density, you don't control where the projects go, how big are the projects. You want to be in control and determine what your plan will be. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Question?
Very much.
Okay.
Any questions? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Council members have any?
Let's assume we've made all our numbers and everybody's happy. The judge is happy, the courts are happy, we made our number. People move into these moderate low-income units, all right? One of them decides to leave or move, go to Florida, whatever. Who decides who moves into that apartment? Who determines whether they're qualified economically? Ongoing, how does this get enforced and administered?
Yes, you have an administrative agent, the company that I showed up there, CGP&H. If you retain them as your administrative agent, right now they're serving as a consultant, that's their job. They keep a tally of those units that have been deemed for low and moderate. They keep a list. There's documentation that has to be provided to prove that you meet the income qualifications, and they do follow-up. So there is a mechanism in place to do that.
Okay, now, is that for the whole region, the three or four counties that you mentioned?
The person who does this,
No, what I'm thinking of is if somebody at the far end, 4 counties away, is the next one in line to get an apartment, do they have to come all the way up here? Or is there some sanity check on where they are and how far they can travel?
the list that Mr. Gottesman has is a list, you can't set aside only for Parsippany residents by
Understood.
law.
Yep.
It's by region. So he keeps the list and whoever's next on the list. So that
Okay.
it's a fair process. So the sooner you get on the list, the better.
Okay.
And then the municipality can market. There's ways to help encourage people who do live in town to get on the list, and through your marketing efforts.
Let me give you one more example. This is real now. I've had 2 phone calls in the last 6 months. These women were living in apartments. Their husbands passed away. With their 2 Social Security checks, they could afford to pay the rent. Now, husband passed away, they have 1 Social Security check. They can't make the payment anymore. Is there any way we could fold something like that into this program?
I think we can work on something like that. With the expert that we have, there are other programs that may be of assistance that we could incorporate as part of the program.
Yeah, this is a very real issue.
Yes.
2 in the last 6 months that I've encountered. we
And the
couldn't
goal
help them.
is to try to have as many affordable units available in that type of situation. I'm sure with the help of our expert and others, we can find a way to make it work.
I was wondering if we could use our low-income
fund?
trust fund
Mhm.
and subsidize that person's rent and let her stay right where she was when she raised her children.
That's something to be looked at, because you have various ways and different ways that you can use your trust fund monies, and buying down and providing subsidies are included as part of that list, so that's something that we could look at.
Okay, thank you.
In the, sorry, go ahead. In the Market to Affordable program, there had been a conversation about a ratio where it wasn't a one-to-one credit, that there were weighted credits for if we went through with this program specific to the 1515 development, the units that were market to affordable would count as 3 units, not just one affordable unit. Is that still part of this calculation with 1515?
No,
2 to 1?
no, it's 5 to 1.
I can answer your question.
5 to 1.
He's the numbers guy.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, and they are complicated, believe me. What you were addressing was the issue of bonus credits. You can get a certain number of bonus credits. They are capped, so there's caveats with everything. But they are capped, so you can get a 2-for-1 credit when they are in fact rental units available for low and moderate income. But yet it can't be more than 25%, those credits, those additional bonus credits, can't be more than 25% of the total amount of the need that we establish, or RDP, as you hear me talk about in a minute as well.
Also, Ed, Mr. Snikes, excuse me, has Section 8 apartments been calculated in our numbers, or they're not feasible?
It depends. If the units are deed restricted, or if there's some sort of agreement that allows a certain time period for them to be restricted, they would then qualify for that. And that's one important question that people often ask. Is Section 8 affordable housing? It can be, but affordable housing is not necessarily Section 8 housing. What you're looking at is density bonuses and developments to help subsidize the cost and the infrastructure that's necessary to put in place to build those affordable units. So it's a way of going through zoning, this inclusionary zoning process, to help subsidize the housing. They're not getting a federal stipend assisting their rents, things of that nature. It's due to the type of development that's being proposed, such as standard.
Thank you.
And then, wasn't there a difference between, I think we talked about that at another meeting, where it was affordable versus low income, and there's a difference between the two, right?
There is a difference between moderate, low, and very low. There's 3 categories of affordable
Right.
that we have to meet. And so that, you'll hear me talk about in a moment as I show a table. It breaks it down based upon income levels. It can't be more than 30%. They can't pay more than 30% of their income towards housing. And that's how it's multiplied or calculated. And that's specifically income levels. There's a certain number of units in a development that would have to be for very low, and moderate income. So it does have regulations associated with it.
And
There are rules we're following in order to meet those regulations.
And they're calculated the same.
And I think it's important to note, too, that people who would qualify for these units are people who have a salary, who have an income, and it's aimed for people coming right out of school, maybe trying first job, and sometimes even teachers, income people who don't make a lot of money, that can't find a nice apartment. So the goal is to make those apartments, or make some apartments available. You may think that you have a lot of apartments in your township, but the key is how many of them are affordable based on the income limits. And I had our expert check, as of a couple of weeks ago, how many units in Parsippany are currently vacant and available for someone that's considered affordable, and there was none. So right now, there are no affordable units vacant available for someone to come into Parsippany
And
that meet
that's,
those
and that's what I
limits.
found out for the 2 women that called me.
Yeah.
One more question you just brought up. What if you take the teacher that's just starting salary, she falls into one of these categories, but a couple of years later, she's making more?
She's gonna leave.
She's still staying.
Does she get evicted?
Really?
No.
Well, then it's no longer a moderate or low-income housing
That's right.
unit.
Yeah, the restriction is still there.
But they could, depending upon their yearly income and their assets. Let's say, for instance,
Right.
their assets change over time, which many can. There is a yearly accounting of
Right.
that, and that's something the administrator has to take a look at.
That's
So that
true.
person might be replaced out of that unit.
Sure.
There's a certain time
Could be
period
evicted,
involved in that eviction or replacement, let's call it.
Okay.
We're not gonna throw them out. They're gonna be
You're
replaced.
talking about throwing out a
Replaced.
teacher.
Yeah, that's true, there
Thank
is
you.
a process
Yes.
involved.
They're not terminated.
They're not terminated, okay.
And does compliance with the Highlands Council reduce our number in any way, our obligation?
That's very difficult to say at this point in time, because what you look at typically, and it's sort of jumping into my next part of my presentation.
yeah, it said-
Maybe I
Should we
Just
wait,
wanna
should
do
we wait
that.
and let you present?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
if I can go through that, you'll hear about some of the criteria we're looking at under what's called an adjustment to our number.
Ed, if you could please speak into the mic.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Ed, just a quick question in reference to that.
Yes.
Can you answer this before you start? Is there a possibility that us joining the Highlands would have an effect on the number?
Can I answer that? From a legal perspective, we are already in the case, so the train has already left. So it would not affect your third round obligation, potentially your fourth round, since that starts 2026, because there is a time period and a process to get into the Highlands.
Okay.
And at this point, since this case goes back to 2015, in no way will the judge put this case on hold to wait for the Highlands analysis, and in no way will the developers sit still and allow you to wait another year.
Okay.
So
Thank
you'll
you.
be embroiled in litigation.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. For those that don't know me, my name is Ed Snikus. I'm with the firm of Burgess Associates. We represent Parsippany Troy Hills as your housing planner. We work closely with the municipal planner, Susan Favette, who was mentioned earlier. What I'll be going through is Leslie was talking about. There are some mechanisms available to the municipality to evaluate what is your realistic amount of development that the municipality can actually absorb. And one of those processes is called vacant land analysis. And we look at the entire municipality, we look at the available land that's available to the community so that we can assess and arrive at what's reasonable. What is that realistic development potential number for the community? Because as was pointed out a moment ago, even at 1313, that's a significant number of units for a municipality to absorb. Even though Parsippany is at a crossroads of major interstate roadways and state highways, it still is a significant number for us to have to address and deal with it. What the rules do allow for, and when I address the rules, what I'm talking about are rules that actually were not overturned by the court, but are specifically applicable to a plan. And you're allowed to look at those rules and apply adjustment factors to what is realistic in the community. So we went through an entire vacant land adjustment factor and mapping. And what you're seeing here is a series of maps that I'll page through. This is sort of the westerly quadrant of Parsippany. You also have your central quadrant and your northern areas and also the southern area. But what's interesting to note is that in the rules, they allow you to look at and consider environmental features, environmental factors. We were just talking about the pylons a minute ago. What we are looking at is wetlands, areas of wetlands. Those can be excluded from your vacant land adjustment. Areas of open space that's preserved. So if you have something that's on your recreation open space inventory, that can be excluded from an analysis. But they do require you to look at all municipal land, even Board of Education lands, to see if in fact if those lands are developable and accountable towards a realistic development potential. Now these are not sites that we're looking at for specific affordable housing locations. It's just what is that available land after you factor out all these features. So as you see, we have a total land area of about 16,000 acres in Parsippany. The vacant land parcels accounted for about 5,200 acres of that land. From that 5,200 acres, we actually were able to identify and parse down that Parsippany has developable land towards your vacant land RDP of about 152 acres. So you'll see through that process, we were able to filter out what is in fact developable and not developable from the standpoint of the COA rules. When you have that information, you then can plug it into your vacant land assessment. So you can arrive at what is that number, that need number. And then what you were also required to do by the rules, and believe me, this has been a difficult process for us to go through, is other properties such as lands with development potential. You look at plant nurseries, garden centers, you look at farms or similar activities or similar locations. It's required by the rules. You also have to factor in whether or not you have any golf courses. Fortunately, our golf courses are either owned by an entity that doesn't qualify as a available golf course. But if the golf course was owned by its members, like a membership-owned golf course, you have to factor that into your vacant land adjustment and your RDP calculation, which is pretty startling when people hear that.
Our golf courses were bought with Green Acres money, so they're
That's-
exempt.
That's what makes it exempt, and so we're able to factor that property out. Existing developments considered with additional development potential. This is where it gets dicey. When you look at areas within the community where these properties are, is there the ability to potentially, and I'm using the small r, not the larger R, redevelopment that you may have heard about tonight for the Stanberry development. But when a property redevelops, if it's changing from one use to another, it's called redevelopment. And in that scenario, that is something that Fair Share Housing Center, along with the court master, requires us to take a look at. And that is also factored into your RDP. And so with that, we feel confident that we'll be reducing that overall need number from the 1,313 units to between 850 and to 1,000. The reason why we have that range in there is there's still a number of factors for us to consider and parse this down. But we wanted to give you an idea of how we are stepping and adjusting that number so that it becomes more of an approachable number for the township. And I use that lightly as far as approachable, because we understand these things will have impacts. We understand there needs to be a lot of critical thought and planning that goes into any conceptual plan that's put together for the community. But as Leslie had pointed out, we don't like our options. We don't have another option. We have to go through this process, we have to do our planning, and we have to factor it in. But it all has to be done in a weighing factor, and that's planning in a nutshell. Of the obligation, you'll see that there's things that, and these are some of the phrases I want people to start to hear about as we talk about them in the public. There's parts of the overall need, and not just of the 1313, but there are separate numbers in the overall need number that was not touched on earlier. One of them is called a rehabilitation need. That's indigenous or existing homes within the community that need to be rehabilitated that may not have, let's say, electrical systems that are up to code, roofing systems that need to be replaced, things of that nature. What the rules require us as a municipality to do is plan for and provide mechanisms to rehabilitate those existing units within the community. And so that number is 189. Prior round obligation, that's the period between 1987 and 1999. That's identified as 664 units. That has been consistent either whether it was Fair Share Housing Center computing that number or Mr. Redding computing that number for Judge Neergard. So that number remains as a prior need. Our prior two rounds of plans had mechanisms to address that 664 units. Some of those mechanisms were challenged recently by Fair Share Housing Center, but we're looking to address that need affirmatively. As Leslie pointed out a moment ago, we do have the gap period and what's called prospective need, which is grouped together called the third round need. I know these are a lot of new phrases for some, but that is something that you just need to know the general background. Of that gap period and prospective need, that part adds up to the 1313. So you can see how Mr. Redding computed that number from the time periods involved. So with that, we're looking to reduce that down again to the RDP number. The rehabilitation share at 196 units, how we're addressing that. We already currently have a community development block grant program that helps finance our ability to rehabilitate units. Since 1996, you'll see we had 35 units. Rehab from 1996 to 2010, we had another 84. And rehab from 2010 to 2016, which is some of the current reporting that we have, is an additional 35 units. That's a total of 154 units towards that 196 units of existing indigenous need. So that leaves us with the remaining rehabilitation need of 42 units. I mention these numbers only so you understand as we present this in the public that there's an understanding that we have this rehabilitation aspect to our plan. And we do have affirmative components in our plan that we're working through using some of our trust fund monies to dedicate towards rehabilitation. But this might be a program that helps people in need, whether they're restricted income people that was mentioned a moment ago who need to replace their roof, but they're income qualified. They don't have the income in order to afford the replacement of that roof. The rehabilitation component or plan can help finance that improvement to someone's home. So that's rehabilitation aspect. The prior round plan, that 664 units of obligation, what we have in place, and we've already are taking credit for, are portions of Baldwin Oaks and Brookside, which are called prior cycle credits. They give us existing credits towards that need. We can only apply 166 because we're capped at the number of senior units that we can apply towards that overall obligation of 664. It can't be more than 25% of that overall amount. We're also applying what's called a prior round regional contribution agreements, and that is something called an RCA program. Some of you may have heard that phrase before. What that is we actually instituted with various projects in the past, in Mazdabrook, for instance. Those developments financed and paid monies towards a trust fund program that sent monies to Newark. And those monies were received by Newark and rehabilitated and built new affordable units in that area. Unfortunately, that program was deemed unconstitutional and not appropriate for municipalities to be sending all their needs to other locations, not actually adding affordable housing to their communities. Parsippany's been very appropriate in their approach to their planning, but that some communities, as you can imagine, would like to send all their need to another location and not address it locally. And so that's why that program was discontinued. We're also looking at applying existing alternative living, which is another phrase for group homes. Group homes are very good projects where, whether it's a group home carrier or individuals that reside in the group homes. As was mentioned a moment ago, it's not the individual homes, it's the individual bedrooms in those homes apply as credits. So if a home has 3 or 4 bedrooms, that's 3 or 4 credits out of one home. So that's why they're very good programs. Parsippany has been very active in sending and contributing money towards these programs so that we can realize group homes. And that helps to further the efforts of the state, where the state is trying to not institutionalize people with special needs in large facilities. Instead, integrate them in the community. And so this is just one of those programs that shows how those residents or those people are integrated into the community. And they're very successful programs. We also have built inclusionary developments that either, whether it's through a use variance process or zoning, we are able to apply credits. So with that, in our prior round, we're applying 664 credits. So just so you know, some of their existing credits that we have in the community have to go towards what's called a prior round obligation, and they can't be used towards the third round obligation. Although we have some extra, and we are applying some extra towards the third round. And what you'll see here is the general plan that we're looking for to put together for this 850 to 1,000 units of RDP. Some of it involves prior surplus credits, as I mentioned a moment ago, as they're applicable to the actual development. Also, market to affordable programs was mentioned a minute ago, where we can look to convert an existing market unit to an affordable unit by subsidizing, whether it's through the trust fund monies that we receive from certain developments and or existing trust fund monies that we can then be part of the plan. We like this program because it takes existing residential units and brings them down to affordable. We're not adding new units to the community. So you can see how that benefits a municipality. Unfortunately, you can't address all your need with that. It would be much more of an aggressive plan to try to do that, if you can imagine. So there are limits to what we can do there. Accessory apartment mechanisms. It's something we're contemplating. It can only be a very small amount of your need, but that's another program that we're taking a look at, whether it's mother, daughter, or situations such as that. Again, group homes, alternative living is another part of, or another mechanism in our toolbox. But then again, the larger part will be inclusionary housing proposals and zoning. Unfortunately, with the numbers where they are, we need to apply those inclusionary housing proposals and their zoning to address that need. After you, though, factor out all the RDP, which is 850 to 1,000, there is going to be also another phrase that you may hear about called unmet need. Unmet need is the differential between that 850, let's say, and the 1,300 units. So it could be in the order of 500 to 300 units thereabouts that it's going to be qualified as unmet need. In order to settle with the Fair Share Housing Center and to settle with the courts, they want to make sure you have appropriate mechanisms to try to capture that need and address that unmet need. And the way we do that is through overlay zones and other mechanisms. What I mean by overlay zones is that we may look at certain areas of the community and recommend that if a developer and/or an area wishes to revitalize or redevelop their property, and it involves more than 5 units, one of those 5 has to be affordable units in that development. And that's a way of capturing this unmet need. So they want to make sure you have that plan in place. In addition to that, they would also, in many of the settlement agreements that we've been involved in as a planning firm, require is something called a municipal-wide ordinance, where if the zoning board, if the council in the future, for some unforeseen reason, or there's another redevelopment plan that's considered in the future, that adds additional multifamily units that's more than 5 or more units, one of them has to be affordable. And that's only our own due diligence anyway. We want to capture those units as we go forward, if in fact it makes sense for some reason in the future. Not that we're trying to encourage that just captures it, just in case, so that the zoning and the planning board both understand that they have to incorporate that if there was to be an approval for a variance, let's say, in an application. So that gives you an understanding of unmet need. As I mentioned earlier, there is actually where we are right now, and this was the latest 2017 computations for our region, Parsippany's region. What qualifies as moderate? What qualifies as low or very low income? And these are the numbers of the incomes that would qualify. So for instance, a 2-person household, the maximum they could make for a moderate income would be about $60,000. For very low is down as $22,000. For a 4-person family, you would have a maximum of $75,000 and a minimum of $28,000, or about $29,000. So that gives you an idea of the range of incomes that would meet those specific criteria levels. And as you can imagine, there are areas or people within the community or people within service industries that would meet these criteria. And the idea there is to try to incorporate affordable housing within the community so you're balancing the needs of the community. As many of us read about in the papers, we're all trying to avoid excessive commuting costs and travel. It adds to pollution, it adds to additional traffic, things of that nature. So it's better to incorporate affordable housing in a community to avoid those regional impacts to the overall state. And so with that, that summarizes our presentation, and we can open up for any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any council members have any
Yes, I do.
questions?
Ed, you mentioned the taking of existing units. How do we go about locating those units? How do we talk to not developers, do we talk to
Landlords?
the landlords and so forth, that they would be willing?
Yes. In fact, that's in fact one of the mechanisms that we put in place and started to work on. As Leslie mentioned a moment ago, we have hired, the township has hired community grants. See, I always forget the abbreviation, I apologize. But it's a entity that looks at the community, identifies specific apartments that might be within the range of subsidies that we can offer to bring those rents down to an affordable level. And what we're looking to do is establish this program, and what it would do is to allow for a period of 10 years?
Mr. Gottesman has already started that process and has actually come up with a calculation of how much particular units would need to bring them down to affordable, and he has reached out to people. So he's in that process right now.
Reached out to landlords?
Yes, he's in the process of identifying, finding out what the market rent is and how much they would need to bring the unit down. So we've kind of put some numbers together, so when the spending plan is put together, we will allocate X number of dollars to go towards that program to bring down X number of units.
Would that have to be an entire enclosure, like 10-unit apartment or 20-unit apartment, or have to be the whole thing, or
It could be
or
any
could we do a
number.
piecemeal?
Yes, it could be any number of units.
Could we have that widow that I was talking about before? One apartment and let her live there and subsidize her rent then?
If she's income qualified and asset.
Sounds like
Well,
she is.
she was evicted because she couldn't pay the rent.
I appreciate that. And that's probably something that we can take a look at.
Mhm.
Again, it's on a first come, first served basis, so be careful that we can't specifically find existing residents that we want to move into that location. So there has to be a list of people that are entered.
She would have to be on the list before.
Yes.
Well, I know what we did in Edison. We
uh,
had a similar situation where someone actually came to court as an interested party during the hearing and said, I need affordable housing. So the judge asked the developer who was there, who has market units, can you work with her and, you know, the township maybe subsidize some money to bring her unit down. So there's some potential
So there is some flexibility.
flexibility there.
Go ahead. No. When would this list be comprised? Is it when we have our numbers, or the builders are starting to build, or the apartment owners are starting to convert? When are we going to have these lists, or when will these residents or people desiring low income be able to apply?
That is part of what Mr. Gottesman would be putting together. There's a manual that would be part of our presentation to the court with timeframes for implementing the program. There'll be forms set up for people to fill out. They would check the income level to confirm that they meet the level. So there's a process that he's been doing for many, many years that he would be implementing here in the township. So once we come up with the plan and we say X number for market unit for this program, he'll be off and running to start the program and implementing it.
Okay.
Do we have a contract with this Gottesman now?
Yes.
We do. So then we could call him and ask him questions? Or refer a person to him to see if there's something they can do?
Right, but he's not administering your program yet for affordable units.
So we need a separate contract for that?
No, where we need actual units to be on the books for us to then
Okay.
We haven't
provide for
implemented the
that.
program yet.
You already have Brookside and Baldwin Oaks,
Right.
so they are
But they're
available.
private.
But as you know, their list is also
Yeah, there's
currently
only-
populated
yeah.
with many people.
There's only one way
So-
there's a vacancy in
Yeah,
those.
unfortunately. So, but yet, that's the sort of list that we will be starting as we know we have certain units. But yet, that's the program we can get going right from the get-go, is because we have trust fund monies already in place, we can start to implement that market to affordable program right away.
And just to oversimplify for a rhetorical argument, not only is this obligation not going anywhere, but we're going to be faced with a new calculation in another 8 years.
Correct.
More like
This obligation
7.
only goes to
7, yeah.
2025, so we are already in the time period, and a lot of that hasn't been done, it hasn't been caused by the township. It's been through the courts and trying to determine what your obligation is. So you already have, though, 250 settlements in place, and every judge at this point is pushing very aggressively to have these cases resolved, because we're now going into 2019, and you know you'll be starting
Right,
in
so
another
six-
couple of
really 6
years
years.
for
It's really
2026.
Okay.
You said we have 500 acres of land available for
5,200.
calculations?
No, once you look at the overall vacant land, you factor out all the environmental restrictions.
Exactly.
As well as properties that are not appropriate because they're open space controlled.
After you do that,
Right.
what's the total acreage we
I
have?
think we were at 150 acres.
150 acres, okay.
Yes.
150.
So now by the year 2020,
152.
by the year 2025, if those 152 acres are spoken for,
You can reassess.
Then
your-
what?
You can
Reassess.
reassess your vacant land adjustment and see what your vacant capacity is for the community.
Okay.
You're allowed
Because
to.
we're running out of land.
You're allowed, under the current rules, you're allowed to reevaluate your vacant land
Yes.
every cycle that you go through and prepare your housing element fair share plan.
And
Okay.
is this like an eminent domain opportunity where if someone owned a farm or a nursery and the judge said there's a perfectly good nursery right there, put apartments on it, if it was privately held, how would that transpire?
All the municipality has to do is actually zone for it. You don't have to compel a developer to build it. Your obligation is to zone,
Understood.
Just to provide the opportunity for it
right.
to happen.
unless you're doing 100% affordable, which was mentioned as one of the mechanisms before. And that's where that gets a little more complicated. You have to engage a developer, go through an RFP process, things of that nature, in order to establish the 100% development,
Okay.
which other communities have done successfully, and it might be a mechanism.
Ed, we're hearing 850 to 1,000.
Mhm.
And then you mentioned 666 units, I believe.
Mhm.
Do you feel that your opinion, I'm not saying this is going to be gospel, do you feel that those numbers can come down, the 850?
It's
To
really,
1,000?
it's probably inappropriate for me to say at this time.
Okay.
Because we're
Okay.
still involved in litigation.
Okay.
And if we
but-
want to discuss that, we should probably do that in closed session.
All right.
And keep
Let
in
me-
mind too that the 850 is a number that's going to be reduced by the credits that Ed mentioned. So the actual number of units that will need to be produced will not be the 850. It'll be some number lower than that after all the credits that Ed mentioned are applied.
Okay, and then what percentage do we need to build to get to 850?
That's what I'll have to get back to you on.
Oh,
Because it
okay.
involves that whole process, and it's something that you will know about
But-
once we
but
get involved in
through
the
you,
process.
but
And
through you,
remember that-
council, through you, council president, Ed, in a hypothetical situation, not
Mhm.
talking
Thank
about
you.
our specific situation.
Right.
And I think this is usually important for public clarification.
Mhm.
We talk about these numbers of somewhere between 850 and 1,000. That's our affordable obligation. Prospective builders are going to look to build only a percentage of their development as low income. Could you just expand on that so
Certainly.
everyone walks out of here with a
41.
true number rather
Sure.
than a number of just
For high
affordable
income,
units?
for everyone low
Use the
income.
1,000 number.
Yeah,
Thank
The
you.
1,000 number.
Exactly. You saw the math before where Leslie had pointed out that you take 5 times the affordable number of units. And the reason why it's 5 times is that usually it's a 20% set aside of the development is affordable. So that's why it's 5 times the number. But what we wanted to point out is that we do have some existing credits that we're trying to draw down the 850, if it's 850, down lower. So that's why, keep in mind that there is some mechanism still we're looking to apply. But don't get me wrong, there still will be a substantial need for us to address. So I just wanted to be clear on that. You had mentioned also 664.
Oh.
I had shown that number as what's called prior round need.
That was the, okay.
That's not part of the 850.
No, that's
That's a
different.
totally separate number. And I wanted that to be clear as well.
Okay.
I think council needs to keep in mind too that in all actuality, a majority of your units to make your number will be part of an inclusionary project. So you will be faced with and you will be presented with the various proposals that have been proposed, and you will need to make that determination. Out of those proposals that have been presented, which one of those proposals will go into the plan to meet your number?
Okay.
And that's going to be an intensive work effort between now and February 1st
Yes, it will.
amongst the members of the governing body and the administration.
Thank
Now-
you very much.
Now,
Thank you
this
very
is
much.
this is a plan that we have to put together by February. I mean, you know, and this building isn't obviously going to occur.
No.
So we're talking years out for the building.
Yes.
And then 2025, we begin this plan again, and that's my
But
understanding.
I think what's important to recognize is that once the plan is submitted to the Superior Court, and if it is signed off upon by the Superior Court judge and the special master, it will come back to the township for consideration for zoning changes to be in compliance with the plan.
That's right.
So that's the action that will need to be taken by this body. Any zone changes to support the ingredients, so to speak, of what we put in this plan.
But for February, you're talking about putting together this plan and saying, this is where we're gonna build, and we're gonna build here, so picking out different spots where they'll
Yes.
either build or do some.
Your plan will have to identify those projects that you will be using to satisfy your number. So you have to make that decision, what projects are gonna meet your number.
And where you're comfortable with zoning for these prospective developments.
I mean, but what's the, and then I guess that's where you'll tell us where the opportunities are, to
That's
do
correct.
that.
Any other questions?
No, thank you very
good.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very informative, thank you.
Yeah, just a side remark, if I may. The courts don't really care about how many children that puts into our school district.
Nope,
They could care less.
You're correct.
Do they care about infrastructure or anything like that, water resources?
Well, they assume that you will make as part of your agreement with the developer that they take care of the infrastructure issues. And those ABULs that I mentioned earlier, the sites that are selected have to meet all of those ABULs, developable and approvable, et cetera.
And meet standards,
Yes.
okay.
And
Thank you.
through you, Council President, the public and the members of the council should be aware that we met with the committee of the Board of Education last week with the team who made the presentation to you this evening. The Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Sargent, was also present. I know there's one of the board members is in the audience tonight. We went through a very similar presentation to what you experienced tonight with the committee of the board and the superintendent, and subsequently in a closed session, a similar presentation was made to the planning board last Thursday evening. So the reason we're doing this, obviously, right on the holidays coming up, is that there is a huge urgency for us to be able to put this together in the month of January, and that's why the planning board and the school board were both briefed in addition to the council this evening.
Thank you.
Actually, I think we have quite a few members of the Board of Ed here.
I count at least
I see at
three.
least 4.
Yeah, but only 2 of them were at that meeting last year.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, township offices, committees, reports, anything?
Not at this time.
Thank you. Okay. Bids taken, November 15th, 2018, transportation and disposal of sewage sludge cake. November 20th, invitation for bids from New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, licensed electric power suppliers for electric generation services. To be taken, December 20th, 2018, proposals for rental of golf carts. January 10th, 2019, SCADA system improvements, quotations, proposals, qualifications, none. This time I entertain a motion to open up the public hearing.
Motion.
Second,
Motion made by Mr. DePiero, seconded by Ms. Grignani. Roll call, Mr. DePiero,
Yes.
Ms. Grignani,
yes.
Ms. McCarthy,
Yes,
Ms. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Carriffy.
Yes.
Floor is open to the public to speak on any matter.
Okay, if you do come up, please state your name and address. You'll be given 5 minutes.
Maybe we could put this mic back over there.
Colette has the one. He's ahead of us.
Hello?
We're not doing tandem, it's just doing
Give me that.
Good evening, members of the Town Council and Mr. Mayor. My name is Joe Sestaro, and I reside at 10 Trouville Drive. I'm also a member of the Board of Education, although this evening I'm speaking only for myself and not for the Board of Ed. I'd like to know from the council, what is your understanding of the 1515 Route 10's pilot payment, specifically in relation to what portion of that payment's revenue will be shared with the Board of Education? Excuse me. This type of fiscal arrangement between the township and Board of Education is novel, so it's my intent this evening to hear a statement on the town council's desired outcome for an equitable distribution of that pilot between the township and the Board of Education. The Board of Education costs will go up because of this new development. Incremental costs include, but are not limited to, busing, potential for net new teachers, depending on the student distribution, the potential for any number of out-of-district placements of special needs students, etc. And although maybe not immediately, eventually we will reach an inflection point where we will need to build more more classroom space as we fulfill our COA obligations. Quite simply, we don't know yet what 1515s or any other yet to be determined developments will have to the Board of Education's budget. I would also like to know what involvement did the township have with the Board of Ed during this process of developing this pilot. My reason for asking is that one of the algorithms used for the pilot includes an $11,000 per student figure. The actual number is about $16,000 per student based upon the latest data we have. In review, here are my questions. What portion of the pilot will be shared with the Board of Ed? And if that arrangement is yet to be determined, then what is your desired outcome? And what specific involvement did the Board of Ed have with the township to develop this pilot? Thank you very much.
So I can probably answer some of those questions. There's a statutory formula that provides that the pilot payment is shared between the municipality and the county. 95% of that payment goes to the municipality, 5% goes to the county. The project, any project that is entered into an abatement agreement continues to pay land tax. A portion of that land tax is shared with the school district as well as the county and the fire district. The law doesn't provide for any direct involvement of the school district in the formulation of a pilot. That relationship is between the municipality and the redeveloper. Now, whether mayor and council wishes to entertain whether it wants to enter into a separate agreement with the Board of Education to potentially share some of their pilot revenue is it's an issue that I can't address. That needs to be directed to elected officials. In terms of the pilot arrangement being novel, this is not novel. Pilots are done throughout the state. They've been used in New Jersey now for well over 30 years. There were recent pilot agreements in Wharton, Boonton, Morristown. So it's the idea of having a pilot to support a redevelopment project is not a novel occurrence in New Jersey.
Thank you.
Good evening, Town Council, Mr. Mayor. My name is Tim Berrios, 24 Farmstead Drive. And on full disclosure, I am also a member of the Parsippany Tri-Hills Board of Education, although I stand before you tonight as a taxpayer and speaking for myself and myself only. One of the things that got mentioned during the presentation, and I've attended a number of council meetings where this is always brought up, that 65% of the tax dollars that the residents send in go to the Board of Education. And that is probably very much the case. What is never ever mentioned, and I want to make sure everybody's clear on this, is that for every dollar that gets sent in for taxes, in which 65 cents goes to the Board of Education, that goes to Trenton. Parsippany does not get 65 cents back from Trenton. I think in 2018 budget year, Parsippany was short on the formula by $2.3 million, and it might be 2.6, but I believe it was 2.3. So I just want to make sure that's clear, that you're not sending out